Welcome back to the National Endowment for Financial Education's Focus on FinEd, the Policy Convenings series. I am Dr. Billy Hensley, President and CEO of NEFE. In this mini-series of podcasts, we have been exploring where the financial education and financial well-being fields are headed based on policy convenings we held in partnership with the Council for Economic Education. We held this alongside advocates and stakeholders from around the country. Over the past 6 episodes, we've looked deeper into the specific issues in front of the financial education field, with particular focus on challenges and gaps with access. In this last episode, I want to broaden the lens, and I think I have the best possible discussion partner, my colleague and pal, Nan Morrison. Nan is President and CEO of the Council for Economic Education. Welcome to the show.
Billy, it's always fabulous to be here with you too.
I was thinking this morning about how we started around the same time. I came to NEFE as a senior member of the leadership team in May of 2010, and you started at the council right around the same time. So we sort of, quote, grew up together in this space, and we've seen a lot, especially considering where we just culminated with these convenings and the discussion that's ongoing since we concluded. Speaking of that, let's first talk about the topics we chose and the participants. You know, these conversations are not an end-all, but will and should guide the work of our field moving forward. The issues behind post-secondary education, alternatives to FinEd mandates, evidence-based financial education programming, financial education in rural communities, and then how financial education can better support diverse cultures. The list could be even longer than that, I think, but this is where we narrowed in. What do you feel about this and who we invited? I mean, do you think we invited the right people? Do you think these were the right topics at the right time?
Billy, I have to start by saying it was an honor and a pleasure to work so deeply with you and other members of your team on pulling together these convenings. I don't think either one of us could have done this alone, and I think we got some fabulous people to participate, but also I think we got some really good knowledge out of this for where we need to go next. I think we had an incredible set of people for these convenings. They had a lot of knowledge in the relevant areas, but everybody brought a different spin and a different perspective, and I think that's what made them so special. So collectively, and maybe with a little bit of luck, we did end up with a fabulous group of people, and I think we were really wise in gearing each set of participants to the topic instead of trying to tackle everything all at once, because that just made those topic areas even richer.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking about our lunch in New York when we were doing this brainstorm. And we originally thought this would be different. You know, this was pre-pandemic when we started talking about this. And the pandemic presented a challenge, but we were able to reach farther, I think, because of that. Because of the inability to gather in person. Maybe that actually removes some of the barriers. You know, there's always the benefit of being together and having discussions, but we were able to reach further, I think, maybe attract a more thoughtful audience, if you will. And we were also intent to not just keep talking to the same voices and to bring in new voices. And that was something you and I both really felt strongly about, is broadening our sphere of not only influence, but our sphere of learning. Who are we listening to? And that's what I really liked about this. And I think access to really smart people on this topic, and then how topics that are adjacent to direct FinEd can really inform our work. So that's something that I was really pleased with, that I didn't anticipate going into the convenings. I agree with that, you know, with your assessment of sort of the right people at the right time and the right topics.
And going forward, as we decide to continue these conversations, I think we'll be able to play with these hybrid models of how do you leverage technology to get the right expertise in at the right time. So I know none of us would have wished a pandemic on the world, but we are all, I think, taking away learnings for how we can interact with each other in different ways and have that broader, deeper, richer conversation that you refer to. Although I still hope that either I will be passing through on my way to go skiing in Colorado, or you will come to New York again and we can actually sit down and have lunch together, because that is just always so delightful.
Yeah, I've really missed my network of peers and friends and colleagues out in the field. And the great thing about how we've all adapted to utilize technology is what schools are having to do, and what others who are providing direct service to the learner have had to do. And I think because of that, I have personally have a broader network, and I think that will serve our work better because we have been more open to conversations, and instead of having to schedule, a plane ticket or a car drive or whatever, we can pop on and we can have discussions, and we have access to more people who have influence in sort of the greater financial well-being space. Those of us who are trying to serve in a new way can really learn from this. And I've seen so many of the people I respect in the field, you and the council and so many others, transform and pivot. And when I look at the topics of this convening series, the evidence-based financial education programming, if you haven't adapted to how you provide service to your audience, you're likely not going to be around long, or maybe already gone by the wayside. And, I realize it takes resources to do that, but I've been very proud of our community in our field and how we've pivoted to continue to provide probably even better service in some ways to that. But in hindsight, let's think about the convenings in hindsight. Is there anything we should have paid attention to that we may have overlooked?
Right. Well, Bill, I just have to go back to the delivery mechanisms a little bit. We were very fortunate at CEE that we work very closely with educators, and I know teacher training is near and dear to your heart, as well as to the hearts of many of our colleagues. Because we stay so close to the teachers, they had actually been asking us for more virtual access before the pandemic. So we had already started to shift, doing more shorter sessions of virtual training because it really met them where they are with what they need. And it allowed access, and we'll talk about that in a moment, for a lot of teachers who otherwise couldn't attend an in-person training. So I do think that we were pulled a little bit, but we were also, at least at CE, a tiny bit ahead of the curve and ready to really move fast. And that's going to be a really important part of our industry going forward. So when I think about the convenings and what we covered, you'd sent me this question in advance, and I gave it a lot of thought because I'm always thinking about what's next because I'm a driver by nature, as you well know. But I actually think we picked a really good set of topics. And the reason is because they have legs, right? So we're always going to need to be doing research. The post-secondary education space is always going to be changing and present challenges as the country's population changes, as people think about work differently. We're always going to be thinking about access and equity. I'm particularly pleased that months after the convenings, we released, as you know, in partnership with Jumpstart and an esteemed group of colleagues who served on the writing and steering committees, including you and many others, we released a set of unified national standards for personal financial education. And I raise that here because one of the important things that we did was make sure that they were equity reviewed, to make sure that teachers, no matter where they were, who they were teaching, would have standards that would make sense to the kids that they were working with. So even though we had talked about equity 9 months before, and it was a topic that was set many months before that, we were still living that, and we'll still want to see in another year how that's played out in the marketplace with the people that are using it. So far, the response to that's been really well. So equity, really, really positive. And we also talked about reach, diverse cultures, rural areas. We know only a small percentage of kids in this country get financial education as part of, let's just say, their high school experience. We can talk a little bit about the survey of the states and why that's true. But to the extent that we can create more access to a variety of communities, we're doing our jobs. So that's not going to end until we get all of the millions of kids in our schools in this country educated. There are about 55 million K through 12 students in this country. So figure roughly 8, 9, 10 million of them are in the 10th to 12th grade range when students might get a semester of personal finance. We know we're not reaching that many students. So we have a big way to go on access. So overall, I think we hit a really good set of topics. They are evergreen topics. We will always need to do a little more on all of them. In particular, The things that I think we need to continue working on more immediately are around alternatives to financial education mandates and requirements and the access and equity pieces, because that's where we can make real progress pretty fast if we all focus on it.
Yes, I agree with that. And for many years, I've been trying to more clearly articulate, I don't mean me personally, but just have our field more clearly articulate the interrelatedness of all the factors that influence financial well-being and financial health. And I wish we had a little more time to talk through some of that, but that is so nuanced, and we're still trying to flesh out the research in that space. But I think as we get better understanding of all of these separate topics and how they connect, I think that will be a great win for us as a community, because putting 100% of the effort of any one component of the personal finance ecosystem, for example, financial education, is an off or misplaced, I guess, focus, instead of how do we use education to improve all of the ability to make decisions or advocate for yourself and so forth. I agree with access. I agree with more sort of equity and more diverse thinking in the space is imperative. At NEFE, we have been spending a lot of time on this internally, as well as how we actually fund and do work in terms of research and recognizing good work out in the field and helping build capacity. I can't imagine going back to that 2010, Billy and Nan, when we first started in the space, and being able to have the nuanced discussions that we can now have as a community. We've grown a lot as an industry, and these are the kinds of conversations that help propel that. You mentioned that where you think our first wins are, where we can make a significant impact. One of the things that your organization does is give us a biannual survey of the states and what is going on in access and policy, and that has just dropped recently. What are some of your takeaways about progress, and then anything you feel that from the survey of the states and how that ties to these conversations that we've had about policy?
Well, Billy, I love talking about the survey of the states. And as you've just noted, financial education, I like to say it's just one tool in the toolkit to get to the broader good.
I agree.
So we do the survey of the states to see where we are as a country, high level, in terms of how much access kids have to financial education. So we have, I'd say, some okay news this year. 22 states now require a student to take a course in personal finance to graduate. That's up only one since last year, but up quite significantly over the last 10 years. But that's still less than half. As you know, at CE, we teach economics and personal finance, and there's been no change in economics. And the other thing that we are concerned about, we noted this in our last survey of the states, and we're still concerned now, is the equity and access issue. And that story is still there. And that story is important because in states without requirements, there's a big access gap for kids from lower and moderate income communities. And one of the other big changes since you and I started in these roles was that there's a lot more really good, solid research on outcomes. Again, the bigger picture. And for me, those are things like lower default rates on debt, higher credit scores, better options for college financing, more scholarships. And research has been done on that now that says that if you do have financial education in high school, all of the outcomes for all of those things are actually better. And that puts you on a really good path to achieving some kind of economic stability and mobility in your life, which influences a whole host of other things, from your ability to buy a home, to further your education, to create intergenerational wealth transfer, to be able to afford healthcare insurance. It just multiplies from there. So I am going to speak from where I sit and say that financial education is only one tool in the toolkit, but it's a really important one, especially when you're at that cusp of starting to make some big decisions and needing to, as you're leaving high school, starting your first job, getting further education. The other thing that we know from the past few years is that having someone in your state who's a real advocate and leader makes a giant difference. And one thing that we share in the survey of the states this year is two stories, one from Nebraska and one from Ohio, about how it takes real leadership, but it also takes a coalition of people to get things done in terms of getting a requirement passed. So I hope everybody will go to councilforeconed.org and download the Survey of the States. Actually, you can just Google Survey of the States and it'll show up. But these stories are great, and I hope that they will inspire people in their own states to find out who the decision makers and influences are, work with our local state councils, our affiliates, our university-based centers to bring that coalition together to create some kind of change in that state. And that also includes all of the other not-for-profit partners that you and I work with on a pretty regular basis, because it does take a little bit from everybody, some money from the private sector and the on-the-ground knowledge and skills from people who know how to make things happen on the ground.
Yes. And as an organization that focuses primarily on research and sort of collaboration and convening to sort of promote the greater good in the space, I just want to thank you and the council for doing the Survey of the States and for doing this kind of work, because the more information we have, the clearer information we have, the stronger we can be in advocacy, because we understand the roots of the problem better. We understand where the gaps are. Then that gives you a path forward. You know the benefits and so forth. I think for the average family, the average teacher, I don't think anyone is going to disagree that this is a good idea. I think how we frame the benefits of this work is important, and that's why we hosted these convenings, is to get an understanding of that. I look forward to these ongoing conversations. I look forward to us continuing to be thoughtful peers. But before we wrap up this last episode, do you have any other takeaways or any other thoughts you'd like to share about this work, the future for the council, the future for our industry? Anything else you want to leave with us before we wrap up today?
I do have two further thoughts, and one is around the game plan going forward. The Survey of the States, and thanks for mentioning that again, is an important baseline. And getting a requirement passed does make a huge difference in a state. It's important that that's a funded mandate, because we all know that if we don't train teachers and provide them with the resources, the knowledge, the confidence, as you've pointed out in some of your research, the job just doesn't get done. But there is an alternative, and I'm also a big fan of the bottom-up approach. Even though we've celebrated some of the legislative successes, and we're going to be working with Visa on a big project, you're involved with that as well, to get more requirements passed in more states, bottom up is really good. And if you can get enough people in a school, a district, as part of a state or a state engaged and involved, that makes a difference. So I'm a big believer in advocacy, because making noise is important. Let's say we're all working together in the state to get some legislation passed for a requirement. And as part of that, we had 75% of the superintendents of school districts really gung-ho about it and already starting to work on teacher training. And then let's say the legislation doesn't pass. Okay, but I still have 75% of the superintendents in the state that are really interested in this. And if we can keep that broad-based coalition of people together to say, how do we get this done? And one or two private sector companies say, I can take this district, I can take these districts. If we can identify what we at CE are now calling access zones, particular places in states where the kids really need it the most and are least likely to have the resources to get it done, well, even without legislation, we can get 75% of those districts, and that could be 80 or 90% of the kids covered. So I am really good with that. And sometimes that support from the ground up at the teacher and district level can make a big difference. And even in some of our biggest states, they don't have that many school districts. So that's also a really productive approach. And I think the Survey of the States can serve as an advocacy tool for requirements, but it can serve as an advocacy tool just for advocacy, which can help to get that done. One of the things that I also think is going to be important going forward for our industry is how technology affects how people interact with money. There are some upsides, but I think there are some downsides. It's still too early and there's still too much going on. right now. We know that kids don't go running for apps to learn about personal finance, but we do know they use payment apps all the time. So as we move forward, we're going to want to explore that a little bit more and how we might need to change our education to adapt to that. I know we've included more information about that as we revise the standards. That was one of the things we added in. But I still wonder how that's going to play out in terms of kids' ability to learn, to manage their money effectively, to invest effectively. That'll be an interesting topic for us all to be paying attention to going forward.
Excellent. I really love what you're doing in some of these access zones and how do you target and build these coalitions. I think that is a really thoughtful way. I mean, it's true leadership. So thank you for sharing that with the listeners, and we'll continue to help propel that. You know, Nan, we've worked together many times before, and it was, again, a privilege to work with you and your team on these convenings. A lot of thought and time went into the preparation of the events, and a lot of amazing insight emerged. As we wrap up, I want to thank Nan for joining me today and her team for all they did to help make this happen. And I also want to thank all of those who worked to make this series possible. The staff at NEFE who developed a lot of the content and the strategy for these sessions, the guests who participated throughout and added a layer of context to what it all means, and lastly, those who listened to this series. We hope you were able to pull some interesting information and become a bit more informed, and that there are new considerations and approaches as you advance your work in financial education. You can find out more information about these convenings and a whole lot more on our website at nefe.org under Initiatives. Thanks for listening, and once again, I am Dr. Billy Hensley.
Focus on FinEd, the Policy Convenings, is produced by the National Endowment for Financial Education, a 501c3 nonprofit that is the independent, centralizing voice, providing leadership, research, and collaboration to advance financial education and financial well-being. The opinions and statements made on this podcast are those of the podcast participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of NEFE or constitute statements supported by NEFE. Links to our event summaries and any other documents discussed in this session are available in the show notes. For more information, visit www.nefe.org.